Welcome back to another FPL video and podcast. This will be the best wildcard team for Gameweek 13, and on screen you can see what Drafthound are recommending. There is a link in the description below and you can try out for as little as £2 per week. They've gone for Raya, Pedro Porro, Mazraoui, Gabriel, Salah, Fernandez, Saka, Mbumo, Cunha, João Pedro, Solanke, Fabianski, Maddison, Davis, and Wan-Bissaka. Some of these players do feature in my wildcard team, but there will be many differences to what you see on screen, but it is a very solid template for the wildcard chip, and if you check Drafthound every single day, there will be differences in the algorithms for predicted points, also expected lineups, and much more. Check out all the other links as well in the description, like my Twitter and Instagram, DylanRCM, the Discord server, FPL League, as well as Spotify, and smash the like button of this video if you enjoy it, and subscribe to the channel. My squad value is roughly 103.1 million, but I'll discuss some alternatives at more expensive and cheaper price points, just in case you've got a difference in terms of budget. Without further ado, let's jump straight into it. If you have started FPL before Gameweek 13, then don't worry too much about what you see at the top of your screen in terms of going over budget, because that is for somebody who has 100 million in terms of squad value, and pretty much everybody watching will have even more at their disposal. I'm going to start off with the two goalkeepers and then work our way up to the more important positions, but it's always nice to have a set and forget goalkeeper until the end of the season. I haven't deviated to what I discussed in previous wildcard videos about the best goalkeepers you can buy on the wildcard. That includes Verbruggen, and I'd also consider Robert Sanchez, Onana, and David Raya. For me, they're the four best goalkeepers in the game right now, and when Alisson returns from injury, he would also make it for a top 5 list in this position. And Verbruggen is only 4.5 million, and Brighton have excellent fixtures until Gameweek 18, and I would suggest going for one Brighton and Chelsea defensive coverage, not a double up, but I think one of each team is enough. And if you go for Verbruggen, you can then go for a Chelsea defender, and if not, Robert Sanchez, and possibly somebody like Van Heck or Veltman until Lewis Dunk returns from injury. The backup goalkeeper is pretty much the same as I've discussed in every single video this season, and that's going to be Fabianski, the only 4 million goalkeeper who starts week in, week out now. This wasn't the case at the beginning of the season, but he has been fairly impressive. He's actually gone up to 4.1 million in the last week or two, and Newcastle lost 2-0 to West Ham at home. That was a great performance by the Hammers. They do play Arsenal next, but then there's a nice positive fixture swing from Gameweek 14 and beyond. In football, form is extremely fickle, as we can see with teams like Arsenal, who are winless in 4 Premier League matches. Then in Gameweek 12, they beat Nottingham Forest comprehensively by a 3-0 scoreline, and Jurrien Timber had a goal disallowed in that match. But at right back, he is a different beast. He gets forward and is very dynamic and links up very well with Odegaard and Saka, and he provided an assist in Arsenal's 5-1 win away from home against Sporting in the Champions League. Sporting were second in the Champions League table before that game, and Arsenal look back to their best all of a sudden, but it doesn't really matter much if they can't build upon this momentum, get victories against West Ham and Man United, and put the pressure back on Liverpool. But Gabriel would be the best way of covering Arsenal defensively if you've got the funds, so that's one possible upgrade you could make. But with the structure I've decided to go for, I have gone for Timber as a result, who is cheaper at 5.5 million. Another way of covering Arsenal defensively would be Raya, and I certainly wouldn't mind Saliba, who got a bonus point against Nottingham Forest despite not getting any goal contributions in that 3-0 win, and also Calafiori, who is a bit of a wild card pick. He's a maverick, he can bomb forward, and you never know what you're going to get from the Italian. But I'm going to go for Jurrien Timber at this moment in time, and I did highlight him as a purchase in the Transfers podcast, so be sure to check that out as well. I'm also going for a player who has bad fixtures in Game Weeks 14 and 15, but long term I do back the Red Devils to have a good set of fixtures and go on a decent run. So Mazraoui makes it into this wildcard team, but it wasn't that rosy in Ruben Amorim's debut against Ipswich Town. It was a perfect start in the first minute, going 1-0 up through Rashford, but after that it was a bit of a disaster, and Ipswich Town should have won that game. But I do like Mazraoui for the assist and bonus points potential. He is a bit injury prone though, I'm a bit worried about that, but if he can stay fit, I don't see many better defenders at this price point and below. You may want to consider Joachim Andersen if he's available, but that injury certainly looked nasty. Milos Kerkez from Bournemouth is another decent shout, and of course Lewis Hall, who also makes into this team despite Newcastle's disappointing performance on Monday night against West Ham, and I do like Lewis Hall. I did back him in pre-season and started the campaign with him all the way back in Game Week 1. It didn't really turn out the way I wanted, but he did get me 1 clean sheet against Southampton in the opening game, despite going down to 10 men. And Newcastle were in a bit of form going into Game Week 12, but they are still an inconsistent team. I do back them in most home matches at St James's Park to even give the likes of Liverpool, Arsenal, as we've seen, Manchester City some problems, but I still think Newcastle can be up and down, and you just have to hope that they can get their act together for the upcoming game weeks as well. Let's now go for the other 2 defenders who will be cheaper options, so to speak, compared to Jurrien Timber, Gabriel and Konate, who are still all viable options, and you could double up on the Arsenal defence, and I certainly wouldn't mind doubling up on Liverpool defensively in the long term. But I'm going to go for Aït-Nouri and really target those fixtures until Game Week 18, where Wolves are still in the top 3 of the fixture difficulty rating, according to Drafthound, FPL Team, and all the websites that I show you in the deadline stream. Aït-Nouri has the attacking potential by far the most of any defender I'm going to cover today. Next up is going to be a bit more of a boring pick, but he's got good fixtures and that kind of makes up for it. So Levi Colwill is in this wildcard squad for the first time this season. I still personally think Robert Sanchez is the best way of covering Chelsea defensively, and that's why you may want to go for the Spaniard between the sticks and a Brighton defender like Van Heck or Veltman. Bukayo Saka was awarded Player of the Match against Sporting. I think he could have given it to a whole list of players like Thomas Partey, Gabriel, you name it, Martin Odegaard making the team click. But Saka is so consistent for the Gunners. He can get goals and assists on a regular basis, and I think that's the 5th time this season that he's got a goal and an assist combined within the same match. So he has a high ceiling, and arguably that's something he's improved on compared to recent seasons. And when Arsenal are really in the mood, and we saw this back in February, and there was that period where Arsenal were beating teams really comprehensively week in, week out. If Arsenal can get into that sort of run again, Saka is going to get multiple big returns, 9 and above, and he could be a really good captaincy option, even against West Ham in Game Week 13. And I don't mind him against Man United. In fact, that's one criticism about Arsenal and Saka, that most of the points and goals scored come in home matches, but they did score 5 away from him against Sporting. So that could also be the slight turn in form that Arsenal really need to get that confidence and mojo back for the title race on all fronts. But I think Saka is still the 3rd best midfielder in FPL. You could arguably say 2nd over Cole Palmer, because the Chelsea man has blanked in 4 out of his last 5 games, but I think it's going to be a very close battle from now until the end of the season. Despite the blank against Ipswich Town, I'd still go for Bruno Fernandes, and he does have some tough games like Arsenal and Nottingham Forest within the next 3, but I think it's a decent captaincy shout in Game Week 15 against Nottingham Forest, especially if they can't get their act together defensively, with 6 goals conceded against Newcastle and Arsenal in the last 2 game weeks. I think Fernandes has the bonus points for it, and I think United will click with the new manager. You can't really judge too much based on 3 or 4 training sessions and Ruben Amorim's first Premier League game. We tend to see managerial bounces. We saw it a few years back with Ole Gunnar Solskjaer, but it doesn't always happen straight away. But I do think United will become more resilient and more competitive, especially in the big games. But let's now go on to big players, and I think you can't make a wildcard team at the moment without Mohamed Salah. He is still a captaincy shout against Man City, who were 3-0 up against Feyenoord and somehow fumbled that lead and drew 3-3 at the end. When it rains, it pours, and Man City are actually 6 games without a win, which is incredible. 5 losses and a draw, and Salah will be licking his lips here. He got a brace against Southampton. Not his best performance overall, but he's really stepped up when it mattered most and gave Liverpool the win. And I do think there were some signs of vulnerability against the Saints, but I think you can forgive Liverpool for that because they've been almost flawless in the Premier League this season. Only 1 defeat, which came against Nottingham Forest, and that seems like such a long time ago. And this video is recorded before Liverpool's match against Real Madrid, so hopefully no injuries there, and we can focus on these Liverpool assets for the wild card. I think the 3 best Liverpool assets in order would be Salah in first, Konate second, and then you're looking at Virgil van Dijk in third. I honestly don't mind that defensive double-up, which I mentioned earlier. But let's now complete this midfield with Morgan Rogers. That seems a bit surprising maybe, but I think Aston Villa have great long-term fixtures, and in order to cover Ollie Watkins somewhat, I think Rogers can do a sensible job here at this price point. But you do have Semenyo once he returns from suspension, and Emil Smith-Rowe, and there are other budget midfielders who have really risen to the occasion this season, like Buonanotte once he's available as well. But Morgan Rogers is still my favourite right now, and one of my slight regrets was selling him instead of Semenyo very recently, but maybe I'll feel differently once the Bournemouth talisman is back from suspension. But let's now go for another premium option here in Cole Palmer, who has been out of form, but I still recommend buying him against Aston Villa. He could be a great captaincy shout in Gameweek 13. He's got that high ceiling, and out of nowhere, he can get 20 plus points as he did against Brighton earlier this season, and he can step up in the big games, but sometimes it seems like he's over-reliant on penalties in these big occasions. I do think that will change though. He is a young player, and Chelsea are just rising up the Premier League table. They're currently in third, and if they can build a run until the end of the year, they could even enter a title race conversation. That's how quickly things can change in football. But I think if you're building a wildcard team right now, the three standout midfielders would be Salah, Saka, and Cole Palmer. We have been blessed with budget forwards this season. Chris Wood has been phenomenal since Game Week 1, and I'd advise holding him against Ipswich Town. Then he's sellable from Game Week 14 onwards. You've also got Danny Welbeck, who's been extremely consistent this season, Matheus Cunha, and we've also had the likes of Delap and Raul Jimenez, and there are many others that I probably forget to mention, but we have so many different choices at this price range. But João Pedro is the best one to buy right now, facing Southampton at home, and Brighton are top of the FDR until Game Week 18. They have excellent fixtures, and João Pedro has such a high ceiling with the bonus points, the goals and the assists, and that's one really good habit about him. He can mix a goal and an assist in the same game, so his ceiling is extremely high. We saw it against Bournemouth. The only doubt I think people would have is the early substitution against the Cherries, but there are two reasons for that. For one, Baleba was sent off, so Brighton had to tweak things tactically, and the second is that João Pedro just returned from injury, so they're kind of easing him into it, but in most matches, he's going to play close to 90 minutes, which is incredible for a budget forward, and even during this hectic Christmas period, I think João Pedro is almost as nailed on as you can really get in any position in FPL. I'm also going to go for another talisman, another Brazilian who has been sensational, and one of my best transfers this season, and that is Matheus Cunha. If you had to buy one right now, I'd probably lean towards João Pedro because of the fixtures and also the form of João Pedro, but Matheus Cunha has been even better in recent weeks, of course, with no injuries this season, and even when Wolves are really struggling in the bottom of the Premier League table, having extremely tough fixtures, Cunha was still getting attacking returns, and now with the easier games, he's getting huge returns, double-digit hauls, which is great to see. Another bonus points machine, decent underlying stats, especially in terms of creativity. There might be a huge overperformance in terms of XG, and we see something similar with João Pedro, but they are good finishers and quality FPL strikers, so I do like the two of them, and if I'm building a wild card, they will be two of the first names on the team sheet. Now, I'm a bit more confused about the final forward. I think Isak is still a great choice, but you could certainly make a case for Nicholas Jackson or Ollie Watkins, and maybe some of you are still really bullish on Erling Haaland, and I understand that, but I'm going to go for Isak at the moment. He does face Crystal Palace away and then Liverpool at home. I'm not backing him that much in those particular games, but after that, I think Newcastle have excellent fixtures where Isak can really deliver huge returns here, but you might want to go for a cheaper option, especially if you don't have the money, and I think Nicholas Jackson is still worth a punt, but he is one yellow card away from suspension, and if he gets that before Game Week 19, he will miss one Premier League match, which is certainly not ideal, but if you've got the squad depth with these five midfielders and the likes of João Pedro and Cunha, you would be absolutely fine with Nicholas Jackson. It's time to discuss the captaincy and the starting 11. Verbruggen would be in goal against Southampton at home. That is a great fixture, and even beyond that until Game Week 18, I think Brighton can keep a few clean sheets. Mazraoui, Timber and Aït-Nouri would be the backline, with Fernandes, Salah, Palmer and Saka. That's the strongest possible midfield right now, in my opinion. Bryan Mbeumo is an excellent choice against Leicester City, but Brentford have tough fixtures after that, and Mbeumo's form has dipped somewhat, so if I'm wildcarding right now, I wouldn't go for Bryan Mbeumo, but you might miss a big return against Leicester City. I've gone for Isak, Cunha and João Pedro as the front line, with Fabianski, Rogers, Hall and Colwill on the bench. The expected points is 59.6, and I've gone for João Pedro as the captain, but I think Salah, Palmer, Saka and even Fernandes would be excellent captaincy choices, and I'd consider Cunha as well. I think all of them are great shouts. I think Isak will be at the bottom of the list, but he can still deliver something against the Eagles. I'm currently leaning towards João Pedro though. Let me know your thoughts down the comment section below. I think Salah against City is still a great choice, despite the reputation of the citizens. They are there for the taking, and Liverpool are flying at the moment. So if they can get a victory or a positive result and performance against Real Madrid, it's really difficult to see them dropping points against Man City. But football is a funny game and things change so quickly. We also can't underestimate one of the greatest managers of all time in Pep Guardiola. So in terms of some possible alternatives in certain positions, I think Sanchez, Onana and Raya would be the main goalkeepers to compete with Verbruggen for that starting spot in goal. In the defensive line, you can go for Gabriel and Kanate. Certainly, I've discussed them to death in recent wildcard videos. In the midfield, I think Mbeumo's nice for a 1 week punt. So if you've got a lot of free transfers and you wildcard, that could still work very well for you. You bring Mbeumo in on the wildcard, then sell him in future weeks. But Brentford still have good fixtures attacking-wise against the likes of Aston Villa and Newcastle, in my opinion. And up front, Nicholas Jackson would definitely be the standout striker that isn't in this team. Erling Haaland scored a brace against Feyenoord, and he is still a great choice up front. And Ollie Watkins is going under the radar, but his rotation with Duran and also Aston Villa's kind of balance of the Champions League and Premier League is probably leaving me a bit less infused and also optimistic about Ollie Watkins. And I do think these three forwards, alongside Nicholas Jackson, would be above him in the pecking order. Thank you very much for watching this video and listening to this podcast. If you enjoyed it or found it useful, then be sure to smash the like button and subscribe for new. Our aim is to get this to 200 likes and to keep on pushing towards 35 subscribers. We are so close to achieving that goal. Follow me on Twitter and Instagram, DylanRCM, and check all the links in the description below for my Patreon and the championships for early access to my videos, amongst many other perks, the Discord server, FPL League, Drafthound, as well as Spotify. Leave a 5-star review on my podcast. It goes a long way to support my channel. I wish you all the best of luck for Gameweek 13 and the rest of the season, and I'll see you next time.